He was the enemy. That is the first thing you need to understand about this man. Not in the personal sense. Not in the sense of someone who had done something to earn individual hatred, but structurally, institutionally, historically. A Roman centurion stationed in Capernaum was not a friend to the Jewish people he commanded. He was the living embodiment of occupation. He wore Rome's authority on his chest and Rome's will in his orders. His presence in that town was a daily, visible reminder that Israel was not free, that the promise of a land given to Abraham's children was currently being administered by a foreign empire that worshiped different gods and answered to a different power. He was the enemy, and Jesus said of him, this Roman officer, this Gentile soldier, this representative of everything that chafed against the dignity of the people Jesus had come to, that he had not found faith this great in all of Israel, not in Israel, the whole nation, not in the synagogues and the Pharisees and the devoted Torah scholars and the women who prayed every morning and the men who fasted twice a week. Not in any of the people who had been shaped by centuries of covenant relationship with the God whose name cannot be spoken. Not in any of them had he found faith like this. It came from a soldier, a Roman, and the story of how he found it and what he did with it is one of the most quietly devastating things in the entire gospel. Capernaum was a garrison town. The Romans maintained a military presence there, a small detachment that served the administrative and security needs of the region. And over this detachment was a centurion, an officer commanding approximately 100 soldiers, a man of genuine authority and demonstrated ability, the kind of officer who in the Roman system had earned his rank through years of service and the trust of his superiors. He was not a young man with ambition. He was a man who had been places and seen things and understood power in its most direct and unambiguous form. He had given orders and watched them obeyed. He had stood in the chain of authority that ran from individual soldiers through himself and upward to Rome. And he understood with professional precision how command worked. And yet this man, this centurion with all his institutional authority, had something in him that the authority structure could not account for. Something that had led him to build a synagogue for the Jewish community he was stationed among. The elders of that community confirmed it when they came to Jesus on his behalf. He loves our nation, and he is the one who built us our synagogue. And a Roman officer who had invested in Jewish religious life, who had apparently paid attention to the God whose people he was sent to administer, who had, in some way that defied the easy categories of occupier and occupied, built a relationship with the community that earned their genuine advocacy. He was not a convert. He had not undergone circumcision or formally joined the covenant. He was a Gentile, operating at the edges of a faith tradition that was not his own, drawn to it by something he had not been trained to name. And he had a servant who was dying. The Greek word used in Matthew's account, pais, can mean either servant or child, and scholars have long discussed the ambiguity. Luke's account uses the word doulos, meaning slave. But both accounts agree on this. The servant was dear to him, highly valued, paralyzed, suffering terribly, near death. In the Roman world, a slave was property, a legal object, something owned rather than someone known. But this man's servant was not property to him. The texts make clear that what was at stake was not the loss of a useful possession, but the approaching death of someone who mattered. Someone the centurion felt responsible for. Someone whose suffering he could not correct by any means available to him, despite all his institutional power. He had authority over everything around him. He could not stop a man he cared about from dying. And then he heard that Jesus was in town. If this story is already reaching something in you, if you feel the weight of caring for someone you cannot save, subscribe right now and walk this journey with us. Because what this soldier does next is going to challenge the way you understand faith. That he sent elders, not soldiers, not an official delegation with the authority of Rome behind it. The Jewish elders of Capernaum, the community leaders whose trust he had apparently earned over years of respectful engagement, whose synagogue stood on his investment. These were the ones he asked to carry his message to Jesus. Think about that choice. He had military authority. He could have sent soldiers with a formal request that carried the weight of Roman command. He could have used the only language that most of the world he operated in understood. The language of power and position and institutional weight. He chose humility instead. More than that, he chose to communicate, through the elders, a specific theology about his own unworthiness. When the elders found Jesus and made the centurion's request, they said, "He is worthy to have you do this for him, for he loves our nation, and he is the one who built us our synagogue." They were arguing his credentials. They were making the case for why Jesus should come. And then, as Jesus was on his way, walking toward the centurion's house, the elders with him, a second group of messengers arrived, friends of the centurion, carrying a message from the man himself. The message said, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore, I did not presume to come to you myself. But say the word, and my servant will be healed." Stop there. Read it again. "I am not worthy to have you come under my roof." The man who had built their synagogue, the man the elders called worthy, the man with 100 soldiers under his command. This man looked at the approaching figure of a Jewish rabbi and said, "I cannot have you in my house." Not because of any external rule, though there were Jewish customs around Gentile households, but because of something this centurion had understood about the distance between what he was and who was walking toward him. He was not performing false modesty. He genuinely did not believe he was owed this visit. He did not think his credentials, not his synagogue building, not his care for his servant, not his years of respectful engagement with the Jewish community, any of it entitled him to the presence of this man. He wanted the healing. He did not presume to deserve the healer's physical presence. And then he said something that stopped Jesus in his tracks. "For I also am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes. And to another, 'Come,' and he comes. And to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." It is one of the most compact and extraordinary pieces of theological reasoning in the entire gospel. And it came from a soldier. Here is what he was saying. He was drawing an analogy from the structure he knew best: military command. When a centurion gives an order, the order carries authority. Not because the centurion personally accompanies the order to make sure it is obeyed. The order itself carries the weight of the system behind it. The soldier who receives it does not need the centurion to physically be present. The word is enough because of who spoke it. Now transpose that to Jesus. If Jesus has authority over sickness, if disease is, in some sense, under his command, the way soldiers are under a centurion's command, then Jesus does not need to come to the house. He does not need to stand at the bedside, or touch the servant, or be physically present in the room where the dying is happening. He can give the order from here. The sickness will obey the word because of who spoke it, not because of where the speaker is standing. Say the word, and my servant will be healed. The centurion understood something about authority that most of the people who had been following Jesus for weeks and months and watching miracle after miracle had not yet fully grasped. He understood that authority is not tethered to physical location, that the power behind the word does not diminish with distance, that the command structure he was reasoning from, the system of delegated authority that made Rome functional, was, in some sense, pointing to something much larger than itself. A chain of command that ran all the way up to the one who had authority over the natural world and everything in it. He had reasoned his way to a theology of the word, from soldiers and orders and the mechanics of Roman command structure, from his professional life, from what his hands knew. And Jesus stopped walking. He turned to the crowd that was following him, and he said something that he had never said before, something that the gospel writers clearly understood was extraordinary enough to record word for word. I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. Not even in Israel. Feel the weight of those words in the context in which they were spoken. Jesus was surrounded by Jewish followers, people who had been shaped by the covenant, who had heard Torah read in synagogues since childhood, who believed in the God of Abraham and Sarah, and were hoping this teacher from Nazareth might be the fulfillment of everything that hope had been building toward. They had more theological preparation, more cultural formation in faith, more familiarity with the tradition than this Roman officer would ever have. And this man's faith exceeded theirs, not because he had more information, not because he had seen more miracles or heard more teaching. He had seen and heard less, almost certainly. He came from outside the tradition. He had arrived at his understanding through an improbable combination of professional observation and genuine spiritual attention. Watching what happened in the synagogue he helped build, listening to conversations he was never entirely part of, building a picture of who the God of this people might be from the outside, from a position of genuine outsider status. And from that outside position, he had arrived at something that the insiders had not yet reached. The understanding that authority over sickness and death was not limited by geography, that a word spoken here could heal someone there, that the question was not whether Jesus could do it, but whether the one asking understood deeply enough who Jesus was. The centurion understood. Matthew's account tells us that in the same hour, not the next morning, or when Jesus arrived, the servant was healed. Jesus sent word back with the messengers, "Go, let it be done for you as you have believed." And the servant in a house across town was made well at that moment. Distance meant nothing. The word had already arrived. Comment below right now, what does a faith like this look like in your own life? What would it mean to trust that the word is enough, even when you can't see the result yet? Tell us your story. This community was made for exactly this conversation.
Yeah,
There is something about the relationship between Jesus and the centurion in this story that deserves more attention than it usually gets. They never met. That is the remarkable thing. The greatest commendation Jesus ever gave of another person's faith. The declaration that he had not found anything like this in all of Israel was given about a man he never met face to face. The healing that prompted the declaration was performed across town, at a distance, without physical presence or direct conversation. The entire encounter was mediated through messengers and elders, and the space between two people who were, by every conventional measure, on opposite sides of a very wide divide. And yet something crossed that divide. Something flowed in both directions. The centurion's reasoning toward Jesus, Jesus' word toward the centurion's house, that bridged the gap that politics and culture and religion and ethnicity and history had built between them. The centurion did not come to Jesus. He sent. He sent with humility. I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. And he sent with precision, say the word. Two qualities that almost never appear together. Humility tends toward passivity. I'm not worthy, so I'll keep my distance and not ask. Precision tends toward demand. I know exactly what I want, so I'll make my case and expect results. This man had both at the same time. Profound humility about his own standing and absolute precision about what he believed was possible. He did not presume, and he did not underestimate. That combination is rarer than it seems. Most of us err in one direction or the other. Either we presume, we bring our requests with an entitlement that misunderstands the nature of the relationship, or we underestimate and let our sense of our own unworthiness talk us out of asking at all. The centurion threaded the needle between them. He said, I am not worthy, and therefore I am not going to ask you to come. And I believe you can do this from where you are, and therefore I am going to ask you to do exactly that. Say the word. That is the prayer of someone who has genuinely understood both their own position and the nature of what they're asking. Not entitled, not despairing, just clear-eyed about who they are and who they're asking. We know almost nothing about the servant. His name is not recorded. His age, his background, his specific condition, the details are not given to us. He is the recipient of the miracle without being a participant in it. He was sick and near death and lying in a house across town, probably unaware that a conversation was happening at the edge of the city that involved his life. He did not ask for this. He could not have asked for this. He was too sick, too close to the end, to organize a mission on his own behalf. Someone else carried his need to the only place it could be addressed. In this way, he is one of the purest examples in the Gospels of the kind of receiving that requires nothing of the one who receives. He had no faith to exercise. He was beyond that. He had no request to make. He had nothing to contribute to his own healing except the fact of his existence and the fact of someone else's care for him. And he was healed because a Roman soldier went outside his cultural comfort zone and outside his institutional power and said, with more theological precision than most trained theologians manage, say the word, the servant was healed by someone else's faith. This is the dimension of this story that quietly opens everything. Because it means that faith is not only individual, it is not only the possession and exercise of the person who needs the miracle. There is a kind of faith that works on behalf of another, that carries the need of the one who cannot carry it themselves, that stands in the space between the sick and the healer and makes the connection. The centurion's faith was not for himself. It was entirely for another person. It cost him in social exposure, in vulnerability, in the specific humility of a man of rank, approaching someone outside his own authority structure and saying, "I am not worthy." It cost him, and the servant received the benefit. This is one of the fundamental patterns of the gospel. Faith on behalf of others. The paralyzed man and his 4 friends who tore through a roof to lower him down. Jairus, who threw himself at Jesus' feet while his daughter was dying. The Syrophoenician woman arguing her case on behalf of her daughter with a persistence that wrung a miracle from a conversation that started with resistance. The faith that asks for someone else can do things that self-focused asking cannot. The Gospel of Matthew says that when Jesus heard the centurion's message, he marveled. He marveled. Jesus marveled. The word in the Greek, ethaumasin, means to be filled with wonder, to be astonished. It appears very rarely in the Gospels in connection with Jesus. Mostly, it is the crowds who marvel at him. But here, in response to the faith of a Roman soldier, articulated through a logical argument drawn from military chain of command, Jesus experienced wonder. What does it mean for the incarnate Son of God to be astonished? What does it tell us about the nature of this moment, that the one who made the world looked at a centurion's message and had the human experience of being genuinely surprised? It tells us that faith, real faith, the kind the centurion demonstrated, is not something that can be predicted by background or heritage or religious formation. It shows up where it shows up. It erupts in unexpected soil. It arrives from directions that the conventional wisdom about where faith lives would never have anticipated. The religious establishment of the day would have told you to look for great faith in the synagogues, in the scholars, in the people most saturated in the tradition. And certainly some of the most significant faith in the Gospels does come from exactly those places. Jairus was a synagogue ruler, and his desperate trust produced a raising from the dead. But the centurion was looking for faith in entirely different soil, in a man shaped by military command, by the mechanics of institutional authority, by years of professional experience with how power works and how orders travel down a chain of command. In that specific professional formation, this man had found an analogy that took him further into understanding the nature of Jesus' authority than most of the disciples had yet gone. He had reasoned his way to astonishing faith from his job. This matters because it means that the formative experiences of your specific life, whatever they are not obstacles to faith. They may, if you pay attention to them the right way, be precisely the pathway by which you arrive at something real. The centurion's soldiering was not separate from his faith. It was the medium through which his faith formed. What is your professional formation? What does your life's work know about authority, or care, or the mechanics of how things get done? What analogy lies inside your specific experience that might, if you let it, carry you further into understanding than the generic theological categories ever could. The soldier found his way in through chain of command. "What's yours?" "Baye." The servant was healed in that hour, across town, in a house the healing never physically entered, by a word spoken on the road by a rabbi who turned to a crowd and said, with wonder in his voice, that he had never seen anything like this. And the centurion went home. We don't know what happened next. The gospel doesn't follow him. There is no record of a formal conversion, no account of him joining the disciples, no further appearance in the narrative. He recedes after this moment, the way many of the people touched by miracles recede. Their specific scene complete, their moment in the story fulfilled, their lives continuing in directions the text doesn't track. But something was different in that house when he walked back through the door. The servant who had been near death was well. Whatever had been wrong, paralysis, anguish, the specific terrible dying that Matthew and Luke both describe with unusual concern, it was gone. His servant was alive and whole. And the centurion had a story to carry. The story of going outside, everything his training had prepared him for, and asking, with his professional logic laid out as honestly as he could lay it, for something he had no institutional mechanism to obtain. The story of humility that did not prevent asking, and precision that did not tip into presumption. The story of a word spoken across distance that arrived before the messenger did. He was the first Gentile in the gospel accounts to receive a miracle from Jesus, not the last. The story of what he experienced, the unremarkable man healed without physical presence, the unprecedented commendation from the teacher who was rarely surprised by anything, the logic of authority that crossed the boundary between military structure and theological reality. That story found its way into 2 Gospels and has been in the stream of human testimony ever since. Because the people who heard it recognized something that answered a question they were carrying. Is this available to me? I am not inside the tradition. I am not formed by the centuries of covenant that shaped the people he came to. I am the outside, the Gentile, the one who built the synagogue but was never quite part of it. Is there something here for people like me? And the story of the centurion said yes. Not just yes. Astonishing yes. Faith that marvels Jesus. Healing that comes across distance. A word that does not require your physical presence in the right location, or your membership in the right community, or your possession of the right credentials. Say the word. That request is still available. Not as a magic formula, not as a technique, but as the posture of someone who has thought carefully about who they are and who they are asking, and has arrived at the intersection of genuine humility and genuine trust. I am not worthy, and I believe you can do this from where you are. Both things at the same time. That is the faith that astonished Jesus 2,000 years ago on a road outside Capernaum. That is the faith that is still available to you. The word travels across distance. It always has. If this story moved you today, if the centurion's faith reached something in you that needed reaching, please share this video with one person in your life who is carrying someone else's need right now. Someone who is standing between a sick servant and the only one who can help. Leave a comment. Tell us your centurion moment, the time you went outside your comfort and your credentials and asked for something you knew you didn't deserve. Comment. Say the word. If you are asking right now for yourself, or for someone you love. Subscribe. Because every story in this series is about the moment an ordinary person encountered something that defied their categories and changed them forever. The word travels, and it is already on its way.